I'm Heather, 35, and last month I discovered my parents sold my $690,000 lake house that took me 10 years to build. When confronted, my mother Eleanor coldly stated, "You've always wasted money on meaningless things. We need that money to secure Brian's future." I should have been devastated finding that forged power of attorney document, but instead, I couldn't hide my smile. What my parents didn't realize when they betrayed me was that the house they sold was actually not what they thought. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal. Growing up in suburban Boston, my relationship with my parents, Eleanor and Howard, was always strained. From my earliest memories, I was constantly compared to my golden child, brother Brian. No matter what achievements I earned, Eleanor found ways to diminish them while simultaneously elevating Brian's most mediocre accomplishments to legendary status. Brian got AC in algebra? Well, he's just so creative. Math isn't his strong suit, she'd say dismissively. Then in the same breath, Heather got straight A's again? Well, that's expected, isn't it? She doesn't have any extracurricular activities like her brother. The truth was, I didn't have extracurriculars because I was working part-time jobs since age 16 to save for college, knowing instinctively that my parents wouldn't prioritize my education the way they did Brian's. My father Howard was never openly cruel like my mother, but his passive silence when she belittled me was its own form of betrayal. He'd stare at his dinner plate, refusing to meet my eyes when Eleanor launched into one of her tirades about how I needed to be more like your brother. Through high school, the pattern continued. Brian would struggle academically but excel at football, earning average grades and a middling position on the team. My parents attended every game, cheering loudly from the stands. Meanwhile, I graduated valedictorian and gave my speech to an auditorium where my parents' seats remained conspicuously empty. Brian had a scrimmage across town, was the excuse I received later, though I learned from my Aunt Patricia that the scrimmage had ended hours before my ceremony. This dynamic created predictable outcomes. Brian developed an inflated sense of entitlement and financial irresponsibility. Why work hard when mom and dad would always bail him out? By contrast, I became fiercely independent, determined to build a life that wouldn't require me to beg for scraps of approval from people who seemed constitutionally incapable of giving it. After high school, I earned a full academic scholarship to Northwestern University. My parents seemed almost disappointed that they wouldn't have to contribute financially, especially when compared to the significant sums they were spending on Brian's education at a private college where he was barely maintaining a C average. Northwestern is in Chicago, Eleanor sniffed when I announced my acceptance. That's so far away. What if something happens to you? Brian's school is just 2 hours from home. That distance was precisely why I chose it. The day after graduation, I packed everything I owned into my second-hand Honda and drove west toward a new life in Chicago. The feeling of crossing the state line was indescribable, like breathing fresh air after being underwater for 18 years. In Chicago, I pursued a finance degree with single-minded determination. While my college peers partied, I worked multiple campus jobs and internships. By graduation, I had 3 job offers at prestigious firms. I accepted a position as a junior investment advisor at a boutique wealth management company, where my hard work and analytical skills quickly set me apart. Over the next 12 years, I built a career that exceeded even my own ambitious goals. I was promoted 5 times, cultivated a roster of high-net-worth clients who specifically requested to work with me, and eventually became the youngest partner in the firm's history. Throughout this period, my parents remained distant figures who called occasionally, usually when Brian needed something. "Your brother's car broke down again. We helped him last time, but we're a little short this month." These calls always ended the same way, with me wiring money I knew I'd never see again. Each time, I told myself it was the last time. Each time, I gave in when they called again. What sustained me through these years were the genuine friendships I built. Allison, my roommate from junior year, became the sister I'd always wanted. Jordan, whom I met at a professional networking event, became my closest confidant. They attended my work celebrations, consoled me through disappointments, and provided the emotional support my family never had. They became my chosen family, the people who saw and valued me for who I truly was. As my career flourished, I maintained the same disciplined approach to my finances that had gotten me through college. I lived well below my means, invested wisely, and saved aggressively. By 30, I had accumulated enough for a substantial down payment on something I'd dreamed about since childhood, a lakefront property. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood with no distinctive features, I'd always yearned for a place that felt magical. During a rare pleasant family vacation when I was 12, we'd stayed near a lake in northern Michigan. While my parents and Brian remained at the rental watching TV, I'd spend hours exploring the shoreline, imagining what it would be like to wake up to that view every morning. That brief week became a touchstone memory, something I returned to during difficult times. So when I found 5 acres of undeveloped lakefront property in that same region for sale, it felt like destiny. The price was steep $250,000 for the land alone, but I'd been saving for precisely this purpose. The real estate agent Laura seemed surprised when I made a cash offer. "Most people finance property like this," she remarked as I signed the paperwork. "I'm not most people," I replied, feeling a surge of pride at what I'd accomplished entirely on my own. For the next 10 years, I poured my heart, soul, and considerable savings into transforming that raw land into my dream home. I hired architect Catherine to design a modern yet cozy 3-bedroom house that maximized the stunning lake views. Contractor Daniel and his team executed the vision, though construction took longer than expected due to the remote location and my insistence on sustainable materials. I worked weekends and holidays to afford the custom touches that made the house uniquely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, a stone fireplace using rocks collected from the property, built-in bookshelves for my growing library. Every nail, every board, every paint color represented a deliberate choice and, more importantly, represented the success I'd achieved despite my family's lack of support. The lake house became my sanctuary, the place where I could escape the pressure of my demanding career and the lingering emotional wounds from my childhood. I named it Heather's Haven, a private joke since I'd never had a haven before. When the final touches were completed, bringing the total investment to roughly $690,000, I didn't host a housewarming or share photos on social media. This achievement was for me alone. Of course, word eventually reached my family. Brian's business ventures, always changing, never successful, had recently failed again, and he was asking for loans more frequently. During one such call, my father mentioned casually, "Your mother saw pictures of your lake house from Aunt Patricia. Quite the extravagant purchase." The criticism was implicit but clear. I had money to waste on a vacation home while my brother struggled. Never mind that I'd earned every penny through hard work while Brian had squandered multiple startup funds my parents had provided. Never mind that my parents had recently renovated their own home, adding a swimming pool they rarely used. My success was always framed as selfishness, especially if it wasn't being redirected to benefit Brian. That pattern would continue until the day everything changed, the day I discovered just how far my parents were willing to go to maintain their distorted family hierarchy. After 14 years of relentless work, I finally took a proper vacation, a 2-week trip to Italy with Allison and Jordan. We visited Rome, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast, a dream itinerary we'd planned for months. For once, I left my laptop at home and set an email autoresponder. "This is what normal people do," Jordan reminded me when I fretted about being unreachable. "They take vacations without their entire office following them." On our last night in Positano, sipping limoncello on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, I checked my phone for the first time in days. Among the expected work messages was a voicemail from my lake house neighbor Nancy. Heather, it's Nancy Winters from next door to your place on Lake Superior. I just wanted to welcome the new owners, but they seemed surprised I didn't know about the sale. Did you sell your place? Call me when you can. I played the message for my friends, confused. That's weird, I said. Maybe she's confused about which house sold? The Johnsons were talking about listing theirs last summer. Probably just a misunderstanding, Allison agreed, but I noticed a concerned glance between her and Jordan. I tried calling Nancy back, but with the international connection and time difference, I couldn't get through. I sent a quick text letting her know I'd call when I returned to the States, then tried to refocus on enjoying our final evening abroad. But a nagging uneasiness followed me through the return flight and customs process. Back in my Chicago apartment, jet lag, I immediately called the county records office, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The clerk Megan was matter-of-fact as she confirmed my worst fears. Yes, the property at 8572 Lakeshore Drive transferred ownership approximately 2 weeks ago. The sale was recorded on June 12th. There must be a mistake, I insisted, my voice rising. I never sold my house. I've been out of the country, but I certainly didn't sell my property. Megan's tone shifted from bureaucratic efficiency to cautious concern. Ma'am, I have the deed transfer right here. It was filed with all proper documentation, including power of attorney authorization. Power of attorney? I had never granted anyone power of attorney over my affairs. After extracting what information I could from the increasingly uncomfortable clerk, I hung up and immediately called my bank. The customer service representative confirmed that a substantial deposit $690,000 had been made to my account on June 14th, exactly matching the purchase price of the property. Dizzy with confusion and mounting horror, I threw some clothes into an overnight bag and began the 6-hour drive to the lake house. My mind raced through possible explanations, each more implausible than the last. A clerical error? Identity theft? Some bizarre administrative mistake? I arrived at dusk, the familiar winding road leading to my sanctuary now feeling like the approach to a crime scene. As I rounded the final curve, my headlights illuminated a strange SUV in the driveway where my car should have been. Lights glowed warmly from within the house, and unfamiliar silhouettes moved behind the windows. Numb with disbelief, I parked and approached the front door, my feet moving automatically while my brain struggled to process what was happening. A middle-aged man answered my knock, friendly but confused. "Can I help you?" he asked, a woman and teenage boy visible behind him in my living room. "This is my house," I said simply, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. The man's expression shifted from welcoming to concerned. "I think there's some confusion. We purchased this property 2 weeks ago. We're the Bennetts." "I never sold this house," I insisted, tears threatening. "There's been a terrible mistake." Mrs. Bennett joined her husband at the door, her initial smile fading as she assessed the situation. "We have all the paperwork," she said gently. The sale was completely legitimate. "Would you like to see our documents?" In a surreal daze, the room seemed to tilt sideways as realization dawned. My own parents had somehow forged documentation to sell my property without my knowledge or consent. The Bennetts were now legally living in the home I had spent a decade creating, and nearly $700,000 of someone else's money was sitting in my bank account. "I'm sorry," I managed, gathering the papers with shaking hands. "You've done nothing wrong. This isn't your fault. But I need to speak with my attorney immediately." The drive back to Chicago was a blur of tears and frantic phone calls. My attorney Stephanie agreed to meet me first thing in the morning despite the short notice. Sleep was impossible. I paced my apartment until dawn, alternating between rage, disbelief, and devastating hurt. Stephanie's reaction the next morning confirmed the seriousness of the situation. "This is fraud, forgery, and potentially grand theft," she said, examining the documents I'd obtained from the Bennetts. "Someone created a fraudulent power of attorney document." Do you have any idea who would do this? My parents, I whispered, the words burning my throat. The signatures on the sale documents are theirs. Her eyebrows shot up. Your parents? You're certain? I nodded, unable to elaborate further without breaking down completely. Stephanie recommended hiring private investigator Marcus to gather evidence before confronting my parents. Within 3 days, he had assembled a damning collection of proof, security camera footage from the county clerk's office showing my parents submitting documentation, receipts from a notary service later confirmed to be fraudulent, and phone records showing multiple calls between my parents and the real estate agent Melissa who handled the sale. Armed with this evidence, I drove to my parents' suburban home, a place I visited perhaps once a year on obligatory holidays. My mother answered the door, her initial surprise at my unannounced visit quickly shifting to a defensive stance when she saw my expression. Heather, what brings you here on a Tuesday? Shouldn't you be working? You sold my lake house, I said without preamble, stepping past her into the foyer. A flash of something alarm? Guilt? Crossed her face before her features settled into familiar condescension. We helped you sell an unnecessary luxury you didn't need. You should be thanking us. My father appeared from his study, his face paling when he saw me. Unlike my mother, he couldn't maintain eye contact. You forged a power of attorney document, I continued, my voice deadly calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. You committed fraud. You sold property that wasn't yours to sell. Don't be so dramatic, my mother scoffed. We're your parents. We acted in your best interest. That ridiculous house was a money pit. Where's the money? I demanded. $690,000 was deposited in my account and withdrawn the same day. Where is it? My father stared at the floor while my mother lifted her chin defiantly. Your brother's business was failing. He needed capital immediately to avoid bankruptcy. Unlike you, he has a family to support. Brian had married his college girlfriend Amanda and had 2 children, a fact my mother never failed to mention as evidence of his superior life choices compared to my single status. So you stole from me to give to Brian? That's your justification. You've always wasted money on meaningless things, my mother declared coldly. We need that money to secure Brian's future. Family helps family, Heather. It's time you learned that lesson. The conversation deteriorated from there. My father remained largely silent, occasionally attempting to placate both his wife and daughter without taking a clear position. My mother alternated between defending their actions as necessary for Brian's welfare and dismissing my lake house as a frivolous expenditure I didn't truly need. When I mentioned potential criminal charges, she actually laughed. No one would prosecute parents for helping their child manage assets, she said with breathtaking confidence. Besides, you've always been financially secure. Brian has $250,000 in business debt. He needs this more than you need another vacation spot. I left their house in a state of shock, sitting in my car for nearly an hour before I felt stable enough to drive. The casual way they had dismissed stealing nearly $700,000 of my money justified it, even left me questioning everything I thought I knew about family, love, and trust. I called Allison from the road, barely coherent through tears, and she immediately instructed me to come to her apartment. They didn't even deny it. I told her and Jordan later that evening, curled on Allison's couch with a blanket around my shoulders like a shock victim. They acted like I was being selfish for objecting to having my property stolen. They're gaslighting you, Jordan said firmly. This isn't a gray area, Heather. What they did was unequivocally wrong and illegal. That night marked the beginning of my journey from shocked victim to someone determined to reclaim not just my property, but my sense of agency and self-worth. The morning after confronting my parents, I met with Stephanie to develop a strategy. She connected me with financial forensics specialist Gabriel, who would trace the money trail, and recommended continuing with private investigator Marcus to document the full extent of the fraud. We need to understand exactly. Over the next 2 weeks, a disturbing picture emerged. My father's colleague Thomas, a retired paralegal, had helped create the fake power of attorney document, complete with a forged notary seal. Real estate agent Melissa, an old friend of my mother's, had rushed the sale through at a below-market value. Knowing the property was worth closer to $850,000, but listing it for the $690,000 I had invested. She fast-tracked everything, Marcus reported. Minimal marketing, no open house, cash offer accepted immediately. She knew exactly what she was doing. Gabriel's financial investigation revealed that the money had been wired from my account to a newly established LLC controlled by my parents, then immediately distributed to various creditors of Brian's failing restaurant venture. They planned this meticulously, Gabriel noted, showing me a timeline of events. They created the LLC 3 months ago, just after you mentioned your Italy trip to them. The most painful discovery came from Marcus's recovery of text messages between my parents, obtained through a digital forensics expert. Messages dating back 8 months showed they had been planning this betrayal for much longer than I had initially thought. Heather never checks the lake house in winter. We could have the paperwork ready by spring, my mother had written. What if she finds out? She'll never speak to us again, my father had replied. She'll get over it. Brian needs this money now. Besides, she makes enough to buy another vacation house if she really wants one. Reading these exchanges, seeing how casually they had discussed stealing something I had worked so hard for, broke something fundamental in my understanding of family. The parents I had sought approval from my entire life had not only failed to give it, but had actively conspired to take what was mine when I wasn't looking. Equally shocking was the discovery of Brian's gambling addiction, revealed through bank records showing large cash withdrawals at casinos near his failed restaurant. This, not just business mismanagement, explained the massive debt that had allegedly justified my parents' actions. When confronted separately by Marcus posing as a potential investor, Brian admitted knowing about the plan to sell my lake house, but claimed he thought I had agreed to help him. My parents said Heather was on board, he told Marcus, though the investigator noted signs of deception in his body language. As the pieces fell into place, I struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal. This wasn't a split-second bad decision or a misunderstanding. This was months of calculated planning, specifically timed to coincide with my absence, with multiple conspirators working together to defraud me of my property. In therapy sessions with Dr. Laura, whom I started seeing immediately after discovering the theft, I began unpacking not just the current trauma, but the lifetime of family dynamics that had led to this point. This level of betrayal didn't happen overnight, Dr. Laura observed. The patterns you're describing, dismissing your achievements, minimizing your needs, expecting you to sacrifice for your brother, have been consistent throughout your life. This was just the culmination. When my parents realized I was investigating rather than quietly accepting their actions, they attempted to reframe the narrative. My mother called with a story about how they had simply been trying to help manage my assets while I was gaddying about Europe. My father sent an email referencing financial support they had provided during my childhood, largely fictional, and suggesting I owed the family reciprocal support. Remember when we paid for your science camp in 8th grade, he wrote, conveniently forgetting that my Aunt Patricia had actually covered the cost after my parents redirected my camp savings to Brian's hockey equipment. These attempts to justify their actions only strengthened my resolve. With each new piece of evidence, each attempt at manipulation, my path forward became clearer. This wasn't just about recovering my property, it was about finally standing up to a lifetime of being treated as less deserving than my brother. I want to pursue this legally, I told Stephanie after a month of investigation. Criminal charges if possible, civil at minimum. She nodded, unsurprised. We have more than enough evidence. But are you prepared for what that means for your family relationships? I thought about the texts, the planning, the cold calculation in my mother's voice when she declared I didn't need my own property as much as Brian needed my money. What relationships? I asked simply. They destroyed those when they decided to steal from me. With the evidence compiled into a comprehensive file, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change all our lives forever. After careful planning with Stephanie, I decided the most strategic approach was to confront my family together, with witnesses present. Their upcoming 35th wedding anniversary provided the perfect opportunity. They had invited extended family to an upscale restaurant celebration, and I knew they wouldn't make a scene in front of their friends. I arrived early, dressed professionally in a navy suit that made me feel armored. Stephanie accompanied me, introducing herself as a friend when the hostess Amanda seated us. We requested a table adjacent to my parents' reservation. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Stephanie asked one final time. "We could arrange a private meeting with their attorney present." "They didn't give me privacy when they stole from me," I replied. "And they'll behave better with witnesses." My parents arrived precisely at 7, my mother Eleanor resplendent in an expensive dress I suspected was newly purchased. My father Howard looked uncomfortable in a suit, tugging at his collar repeatedly. They faltered momentarily upon seeing me but recovered quickly, my mother's social mask sliding firmly into place. "Heather, what a lovely surprise. We didn't think you'd make it." Her tone conveyed clearly that I hadn't actually been invited. "I wouldn't miss it," I responded pleasantly. "Is Brian coming?" "He's running a bit late," my father said, glancing nervously at his watch. The next 20 minutes were an exercise in strained small talk as other guests arrived, my parents' longtime friends, a few relatives I barely knew. I maintained a pleasant demeanor throughout, even as I noticed my mother shooting concerned glances at the leather portfolio I had placed conspicuously on the table. Brian arrived 30 minutes late, looking noticeably stressed. His eyes widened seeing me, and he nearly turned and left before my mother spotted him and waved him over insistently. I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he took his seat across from me. Throughout the appetizers and main course, I waited. My parents grew increasingly uncomfortable with my calm presence, clearly expecting an outburst that never came. As dessert was served an elaborate anniversary cake, I finally opened the portfolio. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, standing and raising my water glass. The small gathering quieted, attention turning my way. To 35 years of marriage and to family loyalty. My mother's smile froze at the emphasis on the last word. "I've been reflecting a lot on family recently," I continued. "Especially after discovering that my parents forged my signature, created fraudulent power of attorney documents, and sold my lake house without my knowledge or consent while I was out of the country." A collective gasp went around the table. My Aunt Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. "Heather, this is hardly the time or place," my mother hissed, her social facade cracking. "I disagree. Family matters should be discussed with family present, don't you think?" I removed a document from the portfolio and slid it across the table. "This is the forged power of attorney document you created. Notice the fake notary stamp from a notary who doesn't exist." My father stared at the tablecloth while my mother attempted damage control. "Heather is exaggerating a simple misunderstanding," she told the shocked guests. "We were merely helping manage her assets." "By stealing them?" I questioned, removing another document. "This is the title transfer you executed without my knowledge, selling a $850,000 property for $690,000 to expedite the theft." "It wasn't theft," my mother insisted, though her voice had lost its conviction. "Brian needed financial help for his business. You've always been selfish with your money." Brian, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke. "Mom, stop." We agreed to tell her the truth. He turned to me, his expression genuinely remorseful for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. "Heather, I'm so sorry. It wasn't just the business. I have a gambling problem. I've lost everything, including investors' money. Mom and Dad were trying to help me avoid criminal charges." Another shocked murmur ran through the guests. My mother's carefully cultivated image of her perfect son was crumbling before her eyes. So you committed crimes to help Brian avoid consequences for his crimes? I clarified, looking directly at my father, who finally met my gaze. We panicked, he admitted quietly. Brian came to us with loan sharks threatening him. We didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me for help, I pointed out. Instead, you chose to steal from me. Would you have given him $700,000? My mother challenged. Probably not, I acknowledged. But that was my decision to make, not yours. The table had gone silent, the anniversary celebration atmosphere thoroughly destroyed. Several guests looked eager to leave, but seemed too fascinated by the unfolding drama to actually do so. What happens now? My father asked, sounding suddenly old and defeated. That depends on what you do next, I replied. The money needs to be returned. All of it. And I want the property back. That's impossible, my mother snapped. The money's gone, spent paying off Brian's debts. And the house has new owners. Then you'll face criminal charges for fraud. The color drained from my father's face, but my mother remained defiant. No prosecutor would pursue this. We're your parents. I've already spoken with the district attorney, Stephanie interjected. They're quite interested in the case, particularly given the evidence of premeditation. My mother's final defense was perhaps the most revealing of her character. Looking at me with genuine incomprehension, she said, "You never needed that house anyway. You have your career, your Chicago apartment. Brian has a family to support." In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity how my mother had always viewed me as a resource for Brian, not as a person with my own legitimate needs and desires. My achievements were valuable only insofar as they could benefit her favored child. My property existed to be redistributed according to her assessment of who deserved what. This conversation is over, I said, gathering my documents. Your anniversary celebration is your own affair. My attorney will contact you tomorrow to discuss next steps. As I stood to leave, my Aunt Patricia surprisingly rose to join me. I'm coming with you, she said, ignoring my mother's scandalized expression. Eleanor, I always suspected you favored Brian unfairly, but this crosses every line. I'm ashamed to call you my sister today. The restaurant had gone quiet, other patrons unable to avoid overhearing our confrontation. As I walked out with Stephanie and Patricia, I felt dozens of eyes following us. The public nature of the confrontation would ensure my parents couldn't minimize or deny what had happened exactly as I had intended. In the parking lot, my father came running after us, without my mother. Heather, please. There must be some way to resolve this without destroying the whole family. You didn't consider that before stealing from me, I replied. Actions have consequences, Dad. For once, they'll be Brian's consequences and yours, not mine. The drive home was emotionally exhausting. Patricia came with me, apologizing repeatedly for not intervening in my family's dynamic sooner. I knew Eleanor was harder on you, but I had no idea how bad it had gotten, she said. No wonder you moved so far away. That night, my father called 3 times. I finally answered on the 4th attempt. Heather, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. Your mother doesn't know I'm calling. I was weak. I should have stopped this whole plan when Eleanor first suggested it. Yes, you should have, I agreed, unsympathetic to his tears. You've been enabling her treatment of me my entire life. This was just the culmination. Please, isn't there any way to fix this without court? Without everyone knowing what we did. His concern for appearances rather than for the harm they'd caused me was telling. Even now, he was more worried about public shame than about the damage inflicted on his daughter. Return my property and the money, I said simply. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. I hung up, then sat in the darkness of my apartment, wondering whether family relationships damaged this severely could ever be repaired and whether I even wanted them to be. The day after the confrontation, I met with Jessica, an attorney specializing in real estate law whom Stephanie had recommended. While Stephanie was handling the potential criminal aspects of the case, Jessica would focus on recovering my property. I've reviewed all the documentation, Jessica said, spreading papers across her desk. And I have surprising news. Your parents' fraudulent sale may be easier to invalidate than we initially thought. How so? I asked, leaning forward. Because technically, you don't own the lake house, at least not personally, she explained with a slight smile. 5 years ago, you created the Heather Anderson Living Trust and transferred the property into it. The trust is the legal owner, not you personally. My mind flashed back to a conversation with my mentor Alexandra from years earlier. After my promotion to partner, she had recommended setting up a trust for asset protection. As your wealth grows, you need to protect it, Alexandra had advised. A living trust shields your assets from potential creditors and simplifies things if anything happens to you. I had followed her advice, working with an estate planning attorney to create the trust and transfer my major assets into it. The process had been complex, involving multiple legal documents and title transfers. Once completed, I had filed the paperwork and largely forgotten about the technical ownership structure. What does this mean for the fraudulent sale? I asked Jessica. It means your parents never had the right to sell the property, even with a legitimate power of attorney, she explained. A power of attorney grants authority to act on your behalf personally, but not on behalf of a separate legal entity like your trust. They would have needed to be appointed as trustees, which they weren't. She showed me the property records, which clearly listed the Heather Anderson Living Trust dated May 17, 2020, as the owner, not me personally. Furthermore, Jessica continued, you added another layer of protection by placing the trust assets within an LLC. The Lake Superior Property LLC is owned by your trust and holds title to the land and structures. This creates multiple levels of legal separation between you personally and the property. A wave of relief washed over me, followed immediately by concern for the Bennett family who had purchased the property in good faith. What about the current owners? The Bennetts? They didn't do anything wrong. They're innocent purchasers, yes, but unfortunately they've fallen victim to a fraudulent transaction, Jessica explained. Their title insurance should cover their financial losses, though that process can be complicated. We'll need to notify all parties involved immediately. By that afternoon, Jessica had prepared legal notices to be sent to my parents, the Bennetts, the title company, the real estate agent, and the county recorder's office, explaining that the sale was invalid because the sellers had no legal right to transfer trust property. The Bennetts' reaction was understandable distress. They had spent their life savings on what they thought was their dream retirement home, only to learn the purchase was invalid. I instructed Jessica to handle them with particular sensitivity. Make it clear that I recognize they're innocent victims too, I told her. I want to find a resolution that's fair to them. My parents' reaction to the legal notices was panic. My father called repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. My mother's approach was different. She began contacting extended family members, attempting to rally support against me. Heather is trying to destroy our family with legal technicalities, she told my cousins, presenting herself as the victim. After everything we've done for her, this is how she repays us. This backfired spectacularly when my cousin Samantha called me directly. And Eleanor is telling everyone you're suing them over some misunderstanding about your vacation house, she said. What's really happening? I gave her the unvarnished truth, including evidence of the forgery and fraud. Samantha was silent for a long moment before responding. I believe you, she said finally. And Eleanor always talked about you strangely, like you owed them something just for existing. And the way she compares everyone to Brian is exhausting. Brian himself was conspicuously absent from the family drama unfolding. According to Samantha, he had checked into a residential treatment program for gambling addiction the day after our confrontation at the restaurant. My father, seemingly acting independently from my mother for the first time I could remember, came to my apartment unannounced. He looked haggard, his normally meticulous appearance disheveled. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he said when I reluctantly let him in. "Heather, we didn't know about the trust. We thought we were selling your property." "That doesn't make what you did any less criminal," I pointed out. "You still forged documents and attempted to steal from me." He sank onto my couch, shoulders slumped. "I know. There's no excuse. I've spent my life giving in to your mother's demands, convincing myself it was for family harmony. I enabled her favoritism toward Brian. I looked the other way when she dismissed your achievements." "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me since childhood finally spoken aloud. Why was Brian always more important? My father stared at his hands. "Eleanor always wanted a son. When Brian was born, she was fulfilled in a way she never was with you." I told myself it wasn't fair, but I never stood up to her. It was easier to go along, to tell myself you were strong and independent and didn't need the support Brian did. "That's not how parenting works, Dad. Children shouldn't have to be strong to deserve their parents' love." He nodded, tears forming. "I know that now." Seeing all this explode, realizing we could face criminal charges. It's forced me to confront what I've allowed to happen all these years. While this conversation represented more accountability than my father had ever shown before, I remained cautious. Decades of patterns don't change overnight, and his regret seemed at least partially motivated by fear of legal consequences. "What do you want from me?" I asked directly. "Help us find a way out of this legal mess," he admitted. "Your mother is terrified of going to jail, though she'd never admit it. And I'm trying to figure out how to make amends, if that's even possible." "Return the money," I said simply. "All of it. And acknowledge publicly, to the whole family, exactly what you did and why it was wrong." He hesitated, likely imagining Eleanor's reaction to such a public admission of guilt. "The money is mostly gone," he said eventually. "Spent paying off Brian's gambling debts. Then you'll need to find it elsewhere. Sell your house. Use your retirement accounts. Take out loans. Those are your options if you want to avoid criminal prosecution." He left looking defeated but resolute. Whether he would actually stand up to my mother remained to be seen. As legal proceedings began, I attended a support group for victims of family financial abuse, a surprisingly common problem. Hearing others' stories of parents emptying bank accounts, siblings stealing inheritances, and relatives forging documents helped me understand I wasn't alone in experiencing this particular form of betrayal. Family financial abuse works because it exploits trust and leverages shame, the group facilitator explained. Abusers count on victims not wanting to expose family dirty laundry or break family bonds. This insight helped me remain firm in my resolve to pursue legal remedies despite increasing pressure from various family members to work things out privately. My boundaries weren't the problem, my parents' criminal actions were. As news of the situation spread through family and social circles, I discovered unexpected allies. Beyond Patricia and Samantha, other relatives began reaching out with their own stories of Eleanor's manipulations and Howard's enabling behavior. A pattern emerged of my mother using financial control to maintain her position at the center of the family, with my father acting as her reluctant enforcer. This broader context strengthened my conviction that pursuing legal accountability wasn't just about recovering my property, it was about breaking a dysfunctional family system that had harmed multiple people over decades. 6 weeks after discovering the theft, I filed an official police report detailing the forgery, fraud, and attempted grand theft. Detective Carson was assigned to the case and approached it with appropriate seriousness. "Financial crimes within families are particularly difficult," he acknowledged during our initial interview. "But the evidence here is substantial and clear-cut." The local newspaper ran a story about the case, identifying my parents by name and detailing the allegations. The public exposure hit them hard, particularly my mother, who had always been obsessed with maintaining appearances. Friends they'd known for decades began distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with people accused of defrauding their own daughter. Brian, meanwhile, remained in rehabilitation. Through his wife Amanda, he sent a letter expressing genuine remorse and acknowledging his role in the situation. "I've spent my life accepting advantages I didn't earn at your expense," he wrote. "The gambling addiction destroyed my judgment, but that's no excuse for allowing mom and dad to steal from you to solve my problems. I'm working on making amends, though I understand if you never forgive me." The letter represented the first real account. My attorney arranged a meeting with the Bennett family to discuss their situation. They had been devastated to learn their dream retirement home purchase was invalid, though their attorney had confirmed that their title insurance would cover their financial losses. "We understand you're not responsible for the situation," Mr. Bennett said graciously during our meeting. "But we've already moved in, renovated parts of the house, and mentally committed to this being our forever home. I'm truly sorry you've been caught in the middle of my family's dysfunction," I told them sincerely. "I spent 10 years creating that house, so I understand the emotional attachment you've already formed." After considerable discussion with Jessica, I proposed a compromise. The Bennetts would receive an extended period 6 months to find new property, with all moving expenses covered by the eventual settlement from my parents. Additionally, I would give them right of first refusal if I decided to sell the property legitimately in the future. "This gives you time to find something you love equally without the pressure of immediate displacement," I explained, "and ensures you won't suffer financially from a situation you had no part in creating." Their relief was palpable, and we parted on cordial terms, another small piece of the complex situation resolved humanely. The criminal investigation proceeded methodically. My father's colleague Thomas cooperated immediately, confessing to his role in creating the fraudulent documents and providing additional evidence against my parents. Melissa, the real estate agent, initially denied knowing the sale was fraudulent, but changed her story when confronted with evidence of her multiple prior conversations with my mother about the property. As legal pressure mounted, my mother attempted one last manipulation. She called a family meeting at my Aunt Patricia's house, ostensibly to heal the family division. I attended with Stephanie, suspecting Eleanor's real purpose was to pressure me into dropping the charges. To her evident shock, multiple relatives spoke up against her. "Eleanor, what you and Howard did was criminal," my Uncle Gerald said firmly. "You can't just manipulate your way out of consequences. You've been playing favorites with Brian and treating Heather as a lesser member of this family for decades," Patricia added. "We all saw it but said nothing, which makes us complicit. That ends now." My cousin Samantha shared how my mother had pressured her to take a loan from her college fund to help Brian start one of his failed businesses years earlier. "You told me family helps family, but it only ever goes one way toward Brian." Watching my mother's support system crumble in real time was both vindicating and sad. The family dynamics I had thought were invisible to everyone but me had apparently been obvious to many relatives who had simply chosen not to intervene. The climax of the legal process came during the preliminary hearing, where evidence of the forgery and fraud was presented to the judge. The courtroom was tense, my parents sitting with their criminal defense attorney while I sat with Stephanie. Brian, newly released from rehabilitation, sat alone in the back row. The prosecutor methodically presented the evidence: the forged power of attorney document, the falsified notary stamp, the banking records showing the immediate transfer of funds, and the text messages revealing months of planning. Judge Williams was visibly disturbed by the evidence. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many family disputes," she commented, "but few with this level of calculated betrayal and documented fraud." When my father was called to testify, he surprised everyone, including his own attorney, by fully admitting his role in the crime. "I knew it was wrong," he stated clearly. "I allowed my wife to convince me it was justified because our son needed help, but I knew we were stealing from our daughter. I failed as a father in every possible way, and I accept whatever punishment the court deems appropriate." My mother, by contrast, maintained that she had been acting in the family's best interest until the very end. Even when presented with her own text messages discussing the planned theft, She insisted she had merely been reallocating family resources to where they were most needed. The judge ordered a freeze on all remaining funds from the sale, pending final resolution of the case. My parents were released on their own recognizance, but required to surrender their passports. Outside the courthouse, Brian approached me hesitantly. "I know you probably hate me," he began. "I don't hate you," I interrupted. "I don't even know you, not really. We grew up in the same house, but lived in completely different families." He nodded, understanding. "Mom always made me feel like I deserved special treatment just for existing. It took losing everything to realize how toxic that was." He paused. "I testified against them, you know. Told the prosecutors everything about how they planned this while you were in Italy." This surprised me. "Why?" "Because it's time for truth in our family," he said simply. "I'm trying to build a life based on honesty and accountability. That starts with facing what we did to you." That conversation marked the beginning of a tentative rebuilding, not of the brother-sister relationship we never actually had, but of something new based on adult choices rather than childhood patterns. Through Patricia, "We should have said something," my cousin Samantha admitted during a lunch we shared. "We all saw how differently they treated you and Brian." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Family systems are powerful," she replied thoughtfully. "Eleanor was the family matriarch. Challenging her meant risking your place in the family. I'm ashamed we all chose security over doing what was right." These conversations helped me understand that the dysfunctional dynamics I'd experienced weren't just between me and my parents, but part of a larger family system that had enabled harmful behavior for generations. Breaking that system, even at great personal cost, might ultimately benefit more people than just myself. After 6 months of legal proceedings, we reached a resolution that avoided criminal trials while ensuring accountability. My parents agreed to a settlement that included full restitution of the $690,000 to be paid from the sale of their primary residence and retirement accounts. Additional compensation to the Bennett family, allowing them to purchase new property and cover all moving expenses. My father's agreement to provide testimony against the notary service that had participated in the fraud. Supervised probation for both parents for 5 years. A court-approved restraining order preventing them from having any involvement in my financial affairs. The lake house property reverted to my trust's ownership, with the title officially corrected in county records. The Bennetts found a similar property nearby and departed on good terms, even inviting me to their housewarming celebration. With the legal matters settled, I faced the more complex question of what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with my parents moving forward. My father made consistent efforts at reconciliation, attending therapy both individually and with me when I was eventually willing. He acknowledged the decades of enabling behavior that had led to the ultimate betrayal and seemed genuinely committed to change. "I can't undo the past," he said during one particularly emotional therapy session. "But I'm trying to be the father now that I should have been all along." My mother's journey was more complicated. The public exposure of her actions and subsequent social ostracism had been deeply traumatic for someone whose identity was so tied to appearances. Initially, she maintained that she had done nothing wrong, but as her social circle continued to shrink, she gradually began to recognize the harm she had caused. Her first genuine apology came nearly a year after the initial discovery. "I convinced myself I was acting for the good of the family," she admitted during a carefully structured meeting. "But the truth is, I never saw you as having the same rights or needs as Brian. I treated you as a resource rather than a daughter, and that was deeply wrong." While the apology was significant, I maintained firm boundaries. Trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be rebuilt quickly or easily. I allowed limited contact under specific conditions and made clear that any attempt to manipulate or pressure me would result in immediate withdrawal. Brian's transformation proved surprisingly genuine. Through addiction recovery, he confronted not just his gambling problem, but the entitled mindset that had contributed to it. He found stable employment for the first time in his adult life, declining our father's offer of startup capital for another business venture. "I need to learn to stand on my own," he explained, a concept that would have been unthinkable for him before these events. As for the lake house, I hired contractor Emma to renovate the interior, creating a space that felt new and untainted by the trauma. I renamed it Phoenix Point, symbolizing rebirth from the ashes of betrayal. Most importantly, I began sharing it with friends and trusted family members, transforming it from a private sanctuary to a place of connection and new memories. The first time I hosted Allison, Jordan, Patricia, Samantha, and other supporters for a weekend retreat, I felt the property's energy shift from painful reminder to symbol of resilience. Throughout this journey, I implemented financial safeguards to prevent any possibility of future betrayal. I worked with financial security specialist Daniel to establish monitoring systems for all my accounts and properties. I created a more comprehensive estate plan with crystal-clear documentation of my wishes. And I established relationships with financial institutions that included enhanced security protocols. In therapy with Dr. Laura, I examined the childhood patterns that had made me vulnerable to manipulation for so long. "You spent your life seeking approval from people incapable of giving it," she observed. "That created a blind spot that they exploited. How do I make sure this never happens again?" I asked. "By recognizing your own worth isn't determined by your parents' assessment," she replied. "And by building relationships with people who value you for yourself, not for what you can provide them." That insight guided my decisions about family relationships moving forward. I maintained contact with relatives who demonstrated respect for my boundaries and genuine care for my well-being. For those who continued to pressure me to forgive and forget without accountability, I created distance without drama. With my parents, I established clear, limited terms of engagement. We met monthly in public places or therapy settings with specific time constraints. I declined holiday gatherings that might pressure me into pretending everything was normal for the sake of family harmony. Real healing takes time and truth, I explained when relatives questioned these boundaries. Pretending the harm never happened doesn't serve anyone's growth. 2 years after, the old family system was built on inequality, secrets, and manipulation, I told the small gathering. If we want to create something better, we need new foundations of honesty, respect, and accountability. Some embraced this vision enthusiastically, others found it uncomfortable and drifted away. I came to accept that not everyone from my past would be part of my future, and that was okay. The most profound change came within me. The woman who had spent decades seeking parental approval now recognized her own worth independent of others' assessment. The professional who had built success partially to prove her value now worked from a place of genuine passion rather than desperate validation seeking. The daughter who had tolerated mistreatment to maintain family peace now stood firmly in her right to be treated with dignity. Standing on the deck of Phoenix Point watching the sunset over Lake Superior 3 years after the betrayal, I reflected on the painful journey that had ultimately led to liberation. The property around me was the same, the lake still sparkled, the pine trees still swayed in the breeze, but I was fundamentally changed. The betrayal that could have destroyed me had instead forced me to confront and heal wounds I might otherwise have carried silently forever. I had learned that family is defined not by blood, but by respect, that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, and that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for authentic relationships to exist. The lake house my parents tried to steal had become more than property. It was the catalyst for reclaiming my life on my own terms. What began as devastating betrayal had transformed into unexpected freedom. And for that painful gift, I was finally at peace. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who crossed lines they shouldn't have? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential for your well-being. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that healing is always possible, even after the deepest betrayals.